Professor Velncourt stood before his class of 23 students, his 4 eyes scanning the eager faces that represented 7 different species from across the Galactic Collegiate. His scales shimmered under the soft lighting of the lecture hall as he activated the holographic display. "Today we begin your final project," he announced, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into the common tongue. "You will study a newly contacted species. They call themselves humans, from a planet named Earth." A ripple of whispers moved through the classroom. Kira, whose feathered crest twitched with curiosity, leaned forward on her perch. Beside her, Tamal's gill flaps fluttered in his breathing tank, showing his interest. Zess clicked her mandibles together, a sign of amusement among her insectoid people. "Humans?" asked Prill, his long ears drooping with disappointment. "But Professor, they only just developed faster-than-light travel last year. What could we possibly learn from such primitives?" Several students chittered their agreement. It was well known that Earth had been observed for decades, but the planet had been deemed unremarkable. Its inhabitants fought with chemical propellants and still burned fossil fuels for energy. Hardly the stuff of serious academic study. Professor Velncourt's mouthparts curved in what might have been a smile. "That is precisely why you will study them. Every species has something to teach us, no matter how young or primitive they appear. Your task is to discover what makes humanity unique." He pulled up a rotating image of Earth, blue and green and white, hanging in the darkness of space. It looked peaceful, almost beautiful. "You will work in groups. Each group will examine a different aspect of human civilization: culture, art, science, history, and social development. You have full access to their databases, which they have generously uploaded to our systems as part of their application for galactic citizenship." Kira raised one wing. "How long do we have, Professor?" 12 weeks. Then you will present your findings to the Collegiate Council. Your analysis will help determine how we integrate humanity into galactic society. The class broke into excited chatter. This was a rare opportunity. Most species were studied for centuries before contact. Humans were different. They had practically forced first contact by stumbling into a galactic observation post near their moon. Kira chose to study human history, specifically their ancient civilizations. It seemed safe, distant, probably full of interesting cultural details about how they discovered fire and invented the wheel. Tamal joined her group, along with Zess and 3 others. Over the next few days, they set up their research space in the university's quantum library. The human database was enormous, far larger than expected for such a young species. Kira dove into the ancient period, setting her translator to handle the numerous human languages. The first thing she noticed was odd. Humans seemed to have words for war in every single language. Not just one word, but dozens: conflict, battle, skirmish, siege, invasion, conquest. The list went on and on. "That is strange," she muttered, making a note in her research file. She pulled up information about early human civilizations: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China. Beautiful cultures, rich with art and innovation. But as she read deeper, a pattern emerged that made her crest feathers stand on end. Every civilization had a military. Every single one. On her homeworld, the Avari had developed one small defensive force during their entire ancient period, and only because of a single conflict with a neighboring tribe over water rights. The conflict had lasted 3 days before both sides agreed to share. That was it. One conflict in 10,000 years of ancient history. Humans had been fighting constantly. She found records of the Akkadian Empire, built through military conquest, the Egyptian dynasties, punctuated by wars, the Assyrians, who seemed to do nothing but wage war for centuries, the Romans, who conquered half their known world. "Tamal, look at this," she called to her aquatic colleague. He swam closer to his tank's viewing screen, his 3 eyes focusing on her display. Together they read about the Mongol conquests of the 13th century. A single human, named Genghis Khan, had built an empire that stretched across most of a continent. The death toll was staggering. "This says 40 million humans died," Tamal bubbled in disbelief. "That cannot be correct. What was their total population?" Kira checked. "About 400 million at the time." They stared at each other. 10%, 1 in every 10 humans alive had died in these wars. "Perhaps it is a translation error," Tamal suggested hopefully. But it was not an error. As the days passed and they dug deeper, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Humans fought constantly, viciously, and on scales that seemed incomprehensible. The 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars. Each conflict involved millions of humans killing other humans. Zess approached their workstation, her antennae quivering. "I need you both to see something. I have been studying their industrial period, from about 300 years ago to 100 years ago." She pulled up her own findings. Warfare had continued, but now with machinery. Guns that could fire hundreds of rounds per minute. Explosives that could level buildings. Ships made of metal that carried massive cannons. "Look at this conflict," she said, highlighting a war from the early 20th century. They called it the Great War. 16 million dead, 20 million wounded. Krill wandered over, his ears perked with concern. Surely that was their worst conflict. Such devastation would have taught them peace. Zess clicked her mandibles in a negative gesture. No. 21 years later they fought again. They called it World War II. This time, 70 to 85 million died. The research area fell silent. Other students had stopped their own work to listen. "That is impossible," someone whispered. "No species could survive that." They would have stopped. But they did not stop, Kira said softly, her feathers flattening against her body in a sign of deep distress. "I have found records of conflicts continuing even after these world wars. Dozens of them. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Syria. The list continues right up until last year." The group sat in stunned silence, staring at the gentle blue planet rotating on their displays. It looked so peaceful, but the data told a different story. Humanity was a species that had been at war with itself for its entire recorded history. Professor Velncourt appeared at the entrance to their research area. "How are your studies progressing?" No one answered immediately. Finally, Kira spoke, her voice uncertain. "Professor, we must be making an error in our analysis. The data suggests humans have been fighting wars continuously for at least 5,000 years. That cannot be correct." The professor's scales rippled in an expression they could not read. "Continue your research. We will discuss your findings in class next week." As he left, the students looked at each other with growing unease. Something was very wrong with humanity. Or perhaps, something was very different. And none of them were sure which possibility frightened them more. The university's virtual reality chamber hummed as it powered up. Kira stood in the center of the white room, her claws gripping nervously at her sides. Around her, Tamal, Zess, and 4 other students prepared themselves for the historical simulation. "Are you certain this is wise?" Prill asked from outside the chamber. He had refused to enter. "These simulations are based on their actual historical records. If what we have found is true, we need to see it with our own eyes," Kira interrupted. "Reading data is one thing. Understanding is another." The chamber dissolved around them, replaced by a grassy plain. The year was 1206, according to their system, and they stood on the steppes of Mongolia. In the distance, an army approached. Not hundreds, not thousands, tens of thousands of human warriors on horseback, stretching to the horizon. The simulation was set to observer mode, so they felt no danger, but the sight was still terrifying. The Mongol horde moved with precision, despite its size. They watched as the army surrounded a city, cutting off all escape. The siege lasted weeks. When the city fell, the simulation spared them the worst details. But the students saw enough. "They are so small," Thamal observed quietly. "Individual humans are not particularly strong or fast. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. Yet they do this to each other." The simulation jumped forward, showing them the extent of the Mongol Empire at its height. It covered more land than any other empire in human history. Millions had died creating it. Kira ended the simulation. They returned to the White Room, shaken. Over the next week, they ran more simulations. Medieval Europe, where armored knights fought for feudal lords. The students watched as humans developed more efficient ways to kill each other. Longbows that could pierce armor, crossbows that required little training. Castles designed specifically to withstand siege warfare. "This is what disturbs me most," Zess said during one of their discussion sessions. "They are innovating. They apply intelligence and creativity to warfare. My people had one war in our history. We fought with our natural weapons, mandibles and stingers. It lasted a day. This," she gestured at the data surrounding them, "this is systematic." Tamal had been studying European conflicts from the 16th and 17th centuries. "I have found something called the 30 Years' War. It killed approximately 8 million humans, nearly 20% of the population in the affected regions." He pulled up maps showing the devastation. Entire regions depopulated, cities destroyed, farmland burned. "But here is what I do not understand," he continued. "During this war, humans developed what they call military strategy. They wrote books about how to fight wars more effectively. They created ranks and organization. They trained professional soldiers. They were not trying to stop war. They were trying to be better at it." Kira had found similar patterns in her research of ancient Chinese civilization. A human named Sun Tzu had written a treatise on warfare 2,500 years ago. It was still studied by human military forces today. "All warfare is based on deception," she read aloud from The Art of War. "Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." They have been thinking about this for millennia. Not just fighting, but thinking about fighting. The group compiled their findings for the midterm presentation to Professor Velncourt. As they organized their data, the scope of human warfare became undeniable. "In the last 5,000 years, Zess summarized, humans have fought an estimated 14,700 wars. This does not include minor conflicts or civil disputes. Major wars only." Professor Velncourt listened, his expression unreadable. Around them, other students had stopped their own presentations to listen. "During this same period," Kira added, "humanity developed agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, art, and eventually science. They built magnificent civilizations. They created beauty, but they never stopped fighting." "Perhaps," Professor Velncourt suggested, "you are focusing too heavily on one aspect of their culture. What about their achievements, their art, their literature?" Thamal pulled up a new file. "We examined that, Professor. Much of their greatest art is about war. Their oldest story, the Iliad, is about a war. Their plays, their poems, their music. War appears everywhere in human culture." "Not as a horror?" the professor asked. "Sometimes," Kira admitted, "but also as glory, as duty, as necessity. Humans seem to accept war as a natural part of existence." Another student, Relvan from the peaceful Tellar species, spoke up. "But Professor, how did they survive? When my people developed atomic weapons, we nearly destroyed ourselves. We had one small war, saw the devastation, and immediately banned such weapons forever. The data shows humans developed atomic weapons in 1945. They used them, twice. Yet they still exist. How?" This was the question that had been haunting all of them. The simulation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been the most disturbing thing any of them had witnessed. The flash of light, the fireball, the mushroom cloud, the destruction spreading outward in a wave. Hundreds of thousands dead in moments. They did not destroy themselves because they chose not to, Professor Vaillancourt said quietly. That is what you must understand next. Focus your research on the period after these atomic weapons were developed. The Cold War, they called it. Find out how a species with the power to destroy their own world chose to step back from the brink. The students returned to their research with new purpose. What they found was somehow even more disturbing than the wars themselves. Humanity had built enough atomic weapons to destroy their planet several times over. Two major powers had pointed these weapons at each other for decades. They fought wars through proxies, supporting opposite sides in conflicts around the globe. Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, a dozen other places. But they never used the atomic weapons again. Mutually assured destruction, Tom All read. They created a doctrine that guaranteed if one side attacked, both sides would be destroyed. So neither side attacked. That is insane, Zess clicked. They achieved peace through the threat of total annihilation? Not peace, Kira corrected. They still fought, constantly. Just not with the weapons that could kill them all. They discovered the Geneva Conventions, rules for warfare, laws about what was acceptable in combat and what was not, treatment of prisoners, protection of civilians, banned weapons. They made laws about war, Prill said in wonder. He had been following their research from outside the VR chamber. As if war were like any other activity that needed regulation. That night, Kira could not sleep. She kept thinking about the blue planet, so beautiful from space. She thought about the humans who had uploaded their entire history for the galaxy to see. They had not hidden their violence. They had shared it openly, along with their art and science and philosophy. What kind of species does that? What kind of beings were simultaneously capable of such horror and such honesty? She pulled up one more file before trying to sleep again. It was a human photograph from something called World War I. Soldiers, sitting in a muddy trench, covered in filth, exhausted. But they were smiling, actually smiling. The caption said they were writing letters home. In the middle of hell, humans found reasons to smile. Kira's feathers fluffed in confusion, and something else. Respect, perhaps, or fear. She was no longer certain there was a difference. The warning appeared on Zess's display screen in red letters. The following historical simulation contains extreme violence and disturbing content. Psychological support is available. Do you wish to continue? Zess clicked her mandibles together nervously. She had taken primary responsibility for studying the 20th century, specifically the two conflicts humans called World Wars. The data was extensive, well-documented, and absolutely horrifying. I wish to continue, she confirmed. The VR chamber dissolved into a landscape of mud and barbed wire. The date was July 1st, 1916. The location was the Somme, France. Zess found herself standing in a trench carved into the earth, barely tall enough for a human to stand upright. The walls were reinforced with wood and sandbags, but mud oozed between everything. The smell, even in simulation, was overwhelming. Human soldiers crouched in the trench around her, their faces gaunt and filthy. They wore metal helmets and carried rifles with long bayonets attached. Some wrote letters. Others simply stared at nothing. They looked young, though their eyes appeared ancient. A whistle blew. The soldiers climbed ladders up and out of the trench. Zess followed in her observer mode, floating above the battlefield. What she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. Thousands of humans ran across open ground toward another trench system in the distance. Machine guns opened fire. Humans fell in waves, cut down before they had run more than a few meters. Artillery shells exploded, throwing bodies and mud into the air. Barbed wire snagged soldiers, leaving them hanging as targets. The simulation ran for hours. By the end of that single day, 19,000 British soldiers were dead. Almost 60,000 were wounded or missing. And this was just one battle, on one day, in a war that lasted 4 years. Zess ended the simulation and stumbled out of the chamber. She vomited into the nearest waste disposal unit, her whole body shaking. Zess! Hera rushed to her side, wings fluttering in concern. What happened? The psalm, Zess managed. I watched. I cannot. Kira, they did this to themselves. These were humans killing humans, for 4 years. Professor Valncourt appeared with the university's psychological counselor, a gentle Tellar named Dr. Renfa. Perhaps you should take a break from this research, the doctor suggested. No, Zess straightened, her antenna rigid with determination. No, they lived through it. I can study it. But she did accept the counselor's presence as she continued her work, and she would need it. World War I had killed approximately 20 million people and wounded 21 million more. The numbers were so large, they became meaningless. Zess had to break them down into smaller pieces to comprehend. More humans died in that war than the entire population of her homeworld. The war had introduced poison gas as a weapon. Humans had deliberately created chemicals to burn lungs and blind eyes. They had used flamethrowers to burn other humans alive. They had developed tanks, armored vehicles designed specifically to cross trenches and kill infantry. And then, barely 20 years later, they had done it again. World War II was worse in every measurable way. More participants, better weapons, more efficient killing. The simulation of aerial bombing raids showed entire cities reduced to rubble. Dresden, Tokyo, Hamburg, hundreds of thousands of civilians killed in firestorms. Then there were the concentration camps. Zess refused to enter the simulation for these. She read the reports instead, though they were barely more bearable. Millions of humans killed in factories designed for that sole purpose. I do not understand, she told Dr. Renfa during one of their sessions. This is not war. This is not even cruelty. This is organized evil. How could they do this? The reports say most humans were not involved in these camps, the counselor offered. It was a specific group, acting under a specific ideology. But the others knew. They had to know. And after the war, they tried the people responsible. They created laws saying this was a crime. They promised never again. Zess clicked her mandibles rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. If they knew it was evil, why did they do it in the first place? No one had an answer. The entire research group was struggling now. Prill had withdrawn from the program entirely, unable to cope with the material. 3 other students had requested transfers to different projects. Those who remained did so with regular sessions with Dr. Renfa. Tamal had discovered the atomic bombs. He had run the Hiroshima simulation twice, before refusing to ever run it again. Instant death for those at the center, he reported to the group, his gills fluttering rapidly. But that was a mercy. Those farther from the blast died slowly. Burns, radiation sickness, a new kind of weapon that keeps killing long after it is used. And they built thousands of these weapons, Kira added quietly. I have been studying the Cold War period. Both the United States and the Soviet Union built enough atomic weapons to destroy all life on Earth multiple times over. They called it overkill capacity. Relvan, who had been silent for days, finally spoke. I want to show you all something. It might help. He pulled up a speech by a human named John F. Kennedy, delivered in 1963. The human's words were translated for them. What kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave, or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on Earth worth living. The group listened as this human leader, speaking in the middle of the Cold War, argued for peace and understanding with his enemies. "There is more," Relvan continued. He showed them the Antarctic Treaty of 1959, which banned military activity on an entire continent. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which banned weapons of mass destruction in space. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Biological Weapons Convention. "Do you see?" Relvan asked. "Even as they built weapons, they created laws to limit them. Even as they fought, they tried to contain the fighting. They are trying. But why do they need to try so hard?" Zest demanded. "Why do they fight at all?" Professor Valancourt had been observing their session. He stepped forward now. "That is the question, is it not? You have documented human capacity for warfare. Now you must answer why. And more importantly, you must determine what it means for their application to join galactic civilization." That night, Kira accessed the human information networks, reading their current news and discussions. She found debates about war and peace, humans arguing with other humans about whether a conflict was justified. Veterans of human wars writing about their experiences, describing both the horror and the bonds formed with fellow soldiers. She found a human poem written by someone named Wilfred Owen during World War I. "My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory, the old lie, dulce decorum est, pro patria mori." The translator provided the meaning of the Latin. It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. A human soldier had called it a lie. After experiencing war, this human had warned others not to glorify it. But humans kept fighting anyway. Kira added this to her research file, which had grown massive. She had documented 5,000 years of nearly constant warfare. She had watched simulations that had given her nightmares. She had seen humanity at its absolute worst. They had not destroyed themselves, despite having the weapons and the willingness to use them. They had created art from their suffering, laws from their crimes, and wisdom from their mistakes. The question was no longer whether humans were capable of violence. The question was whether their capacity for restraint was strong enough to make them safe. Kira did not know the answer, and that terrified her more than anything she had seen in the simulations. The research library was quiet at 3 a.m, station time. Most students were sleeping, but Kira sat surrounded by holographic displays, her eyes moving rapidly across screens of data. She had barely slept in days. She had moved past the world wars now, studying human military development in the modern era. What she found was somehow more disturbing than the mass destruction of earlier conflicts. Humans had become sophisticated. "Look at this," she said to Thamal, who had also given up on sleep. After World War II, 2 human superpowers controlled most of the planet. They both had atomic weapons. They both had the ability to destroy the other. And for nearly 50 years, they fought without directly fighting. She pulled up maps showing conflicts across the globe: Korea, Vietnam, Angola, Afghanistan, Nicaragua. In each location, the 2 superpowers supported opposite sides, providing weapons and training and money, but never directly engaging each other. "Proxy wars," Thamal read. "They fought through others." "More than that," Kira continued. "They developed entirely new forms of conflict. Espionage, psychological warfare, economic pressure. They fought in every domain except open battle." Zest joined them, her antenna drooping with exhaustion. She had been studying human military doctrine and strategy. "I need you both to see what I have found. I do not have words for it." She pulled up her research. Humans have been systematically studying warfare for their entire history. Sun Tzu in ancient China, Machiavelli in Renaissance Italy. These are humans who dedicated their lives to understanding conflict. She displayed quotes from these thinkers. "Know your enemy and know yourself, and you can fight 100 battles without disaster. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. War is the continuation of politics by other means. They have philosophy about war, Zess continued. Entire schools of thought dedicated to when war is justified, how it should be fought, what its purpose is. Most species have elders who remember their single war. Humans have professors who teach classes on thousands of wars. Kira felt her crest feathers rising in agitation. But this is the part I cannot reconcile. At the same time they are perfecting warfare, they are also creating rules to limit it. She pulled up the Geneva Conventions, first established in 1864 and expanded multiple times since. Laws about war, rules for how to treat prisoners, protection for medical personnel, restrictions on weapons that cause unnecessary suffering. They created courts to prosecute war crimes. War crimes, Tamal repeated slowly. The concept that there are wrong ways to wage war implies there are right ways. They have normalized it. No, Relvin said, entering the library. He had been doing his own research. Not normalized. Contained. Watch this. He showed them footage from human wars in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The students watched as human soldiers in combat stopped to provide medical care to enemy wounded. They watched humanitarian corridors being established to evacuate civilians. They watched war crime tribunals prosecuting humans who violated the rules of engagement. They are trying to make war less terrible, Relvin said. Since they cannot seem to stop fighting, they are attempting to make fighting more humane. That is a contradiction, Zess protested. It is human, Kira said softly. Over the following week, the research group compiled their findings into a comprehensive analysis. The picture that emerged was complex and deeply troubling. Humans had been fighting for their entire recorded history. They had developed increasingly devastating weapons, from stone axes to atomic bombs. They had industrialized warfare, applying the same innovation to killing that they applied to every other field. But they had also developed restraint. Tamal discovered the concept of mutually assured destruction and the game theory behind it. They mathematically proved that attacking would result in their own destruction, so they chose not to attack. They made peace not through morality, but through logic. After using them in 1945, humans had dozens of opportunities to use them again. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, multiple other conflicts. They chose not to. Some of their military leaders wanted to. Their politicians refused. Zess had found something else. Human soldiers are trained extensively, not just in how to fight, but in when not to fight. Rules of engagement, escalation of force, proportional response. They teach restraint alongside violence. The group began analyzing human psychology, trying to understand the contradiction. What they found was a species that was simultaneously aggressive and cooperative, violent and compassionate, destructive and creative. Evolutionary history, Dr. Renfa suggested when they consulted her. Humans evolved as persistence hunters and social group animals. They hunt by exhausting their prey, never giving up, always continuing. But they also survive through cooperation within their group. So they are loyal to their group and hostile to outsiders, Zess concluded. But their groups keep expanding, Relvan pointed out. Tribes became cities, cities became nations, nations formed alliances. Now they are seeking to become part of a galactic civilization. Each time they expand their definition of us, the fighting within that group decreases. Kira pulled up a graph showing human warfare over time. The number of deaths per capita had been declining for centuries, despite the world wars. They are becoming more peaceful, but they have not become peaceful, and they have not lost their capacity for violence. The question for the Collegiate Council, Tamal said slowly, is whether that capacity is a threat or an asset. Professor Velncourt had been observing their late-night research session. That is indeed the question, and you must answer it in your presentation next week. The group looked at each other. They had documented humanity's violence in exhaustive detail. They had witnessed simulations of horrors that would stay with them forever. They had tracked the development of weapons that could end civilizations. But they had also seen something else. A species that had stared into the abyss and stepped back. Humans who had written poetry about the futility of war. Leaders who had chosen peace over victory. Soldiers who had followed rules of engagement even when those rules made fighting harder. "There is one more thing we must research," Kira said. "We have studied how humans wage war. Now we need to understand what they fight for." Over the next 3 days, they analyzed the causes of human conflicts. Territory, resources, ideology, religion, revenge, prevention of perceived threats. Some reasons seemed logical, others seemed arbitrary or emotional. But one pattern emerged clearly. Humans fought to protect their families, their homes, their way of life, their ideas, their people. They are defensive at their core, Tamal realized. Even aggressive wars are framed as defense. Defending against future threats, defending their values, defending their interests. "Which means," Relvan said quietly, "if the galactic community treats them as a threat, they will respond as they have always responded to threats." The group fell silent as the implication sank in. "But if we treat them as allies," Kira continued, "if we give them something to protect rather than something to fear, then we have the most formidable defenders in the galaxy," Zess finished. They had their answer. Now they just had to convince the Collegiate Council, and hope they were right. The presentation hall of the Galactic Collegiate was larger than Kira had expected. Semicircular rows of seats rose up from the central floor, filled with academics, council members, and observers from 24 species. At the back, she noticed with a flutter of her crest feathers, sat a small group of humans in formal attire. The human delegation, here to observe the analysis of their own species. Professor Velncourt introduced the research team. Kira, Tamal, Zess, and Relvan stepped forward. Prill had been allowed to withdraw, and the other students who had left the project were not present. It was just the 4 of them now, standing before the collective judgment of galactic civilization. Kira began. Her voice was steady, though her claws gripped the presentation remote tightly. "Honored council members, we have spent 12 weeks studying humanity. What we have discovered has challenged every assumption we held about species development and the path to civilized society." The first hologram appeared behind her, showing Earth from space. Beautiful, peaceful, deceptive. Humanity has been at war with itself for at least 5,000 years of recorded history. We have documented over 14,000 major conflicts. This does not include minor battles, skirmishes, or internal disputes. Major wars only. A murmur ran through the audience. Several council members leaned forward. Tamal took over, his tank wheeling to the center of the floor. To put this in perspective, most species represented in this hall have experienced between 1 and 5 major conflicts in their entire pre-space flight history. The Tellar had 1. The Avari had 3. My own people had 2. Humanity has had thousands. The hologram shifted to show a timeline of human history, marked with red indicators for wars. The timeline was more red than any other color. Human warfare is not random or chaotic, Tamal continued. It is systematic, studied, refined. They have developed military science, strategy, tactics, and doctrine over millennia. Warfare is woven into every aspect of their culture. Their literature, art, philosophy, and even their entertainment frequently features war. Zess stepped forward. Her antennae were rigid, but her voice was clear. The 20th century demonstrated humanity's capacity for industrialized warfare. World War I killed 20 million. World War II killed over 70 million. These numbers represent entire populations of some worlds in this chamber. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. In 1945, humanity developed atomic weapons. This is typically the point where species either destroy themselves or immediately ban such weapons. Humanity did neither. They built tens of thousands of atomic weapons. They pointed them at each other for decades. They developed weapons powerful enough to end all life on their planet multiple times over. The room was completely silent now. Even the human delegation sat motionless. And yet, Zess continued, they did not use them. After the first two demonstrations in 1945, humanity has not used atomic weapons in warfare again. They have had opportunity. They have had provocation. They chose restraint. Relvin brought up the next section of their analysis. This restraint is the key to understanding humanity. While they were building doomsday weapons, they were also building laws to control those weapons. The Geneva Conventions, the Hague Conventions, treaties banning chemical weapons, biological weapons, landmines, and cluster munitions. He showed images of human soldiers rendering aid to wounded enemies. Evacuation corridors in active war zones. Humans have spent as much effort trying to limit warfare as they have spent waging it. This is unique among violent species. They acknowledge their capacity for destruction and actively work to contain it. Kira returned to the center. This was the crucial part. Honored Council, we believe we understand why humanity is different. It comes down to evolution. She pulled up an image of an early human standing upright on the African savanna. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. They lack natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no venom, no armor. They are not particularly strong or fast. Instead, they evolved the ability to never give up. The image shifted to show a human pursuit hunt, tracking prey across vast distances. They track their prey for hours or days. The prey is faster, but humans keep coming. The prey is stronger, but humans keep coming. Eventually the prey collapses from exhaustion. Humans win through relentlessness. Now apply this trait to warfare, Thamal said. Humans do not need to win quickly. They do not need to be stronger or better armed. They will adapt. They will persist. They will continue until either they win or they are completely destroyed. This is what makes them formidable. Zess added the next insight. But humans are also deeply social. They survive through cooperation within their groups. This creates intense loyalty. Humans will sacrifice themselves for their group. They form bonds of brotherhood with fellow soldiers. They have concepts like honor, duty, and sacrifice that drive them to act against their own self-interest for the group's benefit. The combination, Relvon continued, is a species that is fiercely loyal to those they consider allies, and absolutely relentless against those they consider threats. The key question is, how does humanity define friend and enemy? Kira brought up historical data. We analyzed this carefully. Human groups have grown over time. Tribes united into cities, cities into nations, nations into alliances. Each time the group expands, warfare within that group decreases. Two nations that warred for centuries can become peaceful allies within a generation. Humanity is capable of redefining their identity, Tamal explained. They can expand their circle of us to include former enemies. This is rare among species with strong in-group bias. The presentation moved to its conclusion. Kira faced the council directly. We believe humanity represents a unique case for galactic civilization. They are dangerous, yes. Their capacity for violence is unmatched. But they are also capable of tremendous loyalty and sacrifice for those they consider allies. Our recommendation, she said clearly, is to accept humanity into galactic civilization, but with specific conditions. First, humanity must be integrated carefully. They must be given reasons to see galactic civilization as their group, not as an other. Second, humanity must be given purpose. A species this driven needs challenges, goals, and meaning. Relevon stepped forward for the final point. Third, and most importantly, humanity must never be cornered or threatened. If this council treats humanity as a threat, they will respond as they have always responded to threats. They will adapt, they will persist, they will fight. And based on our research, we believe they would eventually win. But, Kira continued, if we treat them as allies, if we welcome them and give them something to protect, rather than something to fear, we will have the most dedicated defenders in the galaxy. Humans protect their own with a ferocity no other species can match. She let that sit for a moment, then concluded, humanity is not asking to join galactic civilization despite their violent history. They are asking to join because they are tired of fighting themselves. They want to be part of something larger. We recommend we give them that chance. The presentation ended. The holograms faded. The 4 students stood together, waiting for the council's response. The silence stretched. Finally, Council Chair Velmoth, a venerable Thalian whose species had been spacefaring for 12,000 years, spoke. What you have presented is deeply troubling. The historical record is clear. Humanity is violent beyond our experience. Kira's crest feathers drooped. They had failed. However, the chair continued, your analysis is thorough and your reasoning sound. Humanity's capacity for violence is matched by their capacity for loyalty. This chamber contains many species who are peaceful because we evolved on peaceful worlds. We have never faced true threats. Perhaps it is time we had allies who understand conflict. I invite the human representative to respond. A human female stood. She was older, gray-haired, but moved with quiet dignity. She approached the center of the chamber. Ambassador Sarah Chen, she introduced herself. On behalf of humanity, I thank these students for their honest assessment. They have not hidden our flaws or excused our violence. That takes courage. She looked at each of the students in turn. Everything you presented is true. We have fought for our entire history. We have killed millions of our own kind. We have developed weapons of terrible destruction. We are not proud of this history. But you are also correct that we are tired of fighting ourselves, she continued. For the first time in our history, we have a chance to look outward instead of inward. To be part of something larger than our tribes, our nations, our species. We prefer this option. Very much. You worried about how we would respond if threatened. Let me assure you, we are also worried about that. We know what we are capable of. That is why we have worked so hard to build laws and institutions to control it. We do not want to be the monsters our history shows we can be. We ask for a chance to prove we can be something better. Give us allies to protect instead of enemies to fight. Give us challenges that unite us instead of divide us. Give us a reason to turn our persistence and loyalty toward building rather than destroying. The chamber was absolutely silent. Then Council Chair Velmoth spoke again. The council will deliberate. We will have a decision within 3 cycles. The session ended. As the chamber emptied, Ambassador Chen approached the 4 students. Foreseeing us clearly, both the good and the bad, what will you do if the council rejects your application? Kira asked quietly. The ambassador considered the question carefully. We will respect their decision. We will continue developing on our own, and we will hope that someday we can prove ourselves worthy of reconsidering. She paused. But I hope it does not come to that. We really are tired of being alone. 3 cycles later, the council announced their decision. Humanity's application for galactic citizenship was approved, but with a new designation never before used, Protected Allied Warrior Culture. Humanity would be granted full citizenship rights. They would receive technology transfers and trade agreements. They would be welcome to the galactic community. But they would also be assigned a specific role: defense. When the galaxy faced threats, humanity would be the first called. When protection was needed, humanity would provide it. The Council was giving humanity what they had asked for: a purpose, a place, and a reason to fight that did not involve fighting each other. Professor Velncourt gathered his students one final time. "You have done something remarkable," he told them. "You looked at a species that terrified you and found a way forward. That is the essence of xenoanthropology." Kira looked at the blue planet on the display one last time. Humanity would be joining galactic civilization. Ships were already preparing for formal first contact. Human students would soon attend the collegiate. Human ideas would spread across the galaxy. She thought about the wars she had witnessed in simulation, the death, the destruction, the horror. But she also thought about the humans who had written poems about peace, who had created laws to limit war, who had chosen restraint when they could have chosen annihilation. "Professor," she asked, "did we make the right choice?" Valancourt's scales rippled in the expression she had learned meant thoughtful uncertainty. "Time will tell, but I believe we made the only choice. Excluding humanity would have left them isolated, potentially bitter. Including them gives them a reason to be their best selves." He looked at each of his students. "You studied Earth's wars and learned that humanity is terrifying. But the more important lesson is that humanity is capable of more than war. Remember that. They will need allies who see both aspects of who they are." Kira nodded. She would remember. She would never forget the simulations, the death tolls, the devastation. But she would also never forget the human soldier writing letters home from a trench. The leaders who chose peace. The species that had stared into darkness and chosen to step back. Humanity was joining the galaxy, and the galaxy would never be the same. For better or worse, they were all about to find out what happened when you gave humanity a purpose beyond fighting themselves. Kira found herself hoping it would be better. The galaxy needed defenders, and humanity needed to be something more than warriors. Perhaps together, they could achieve both.